Hello, my name is Owen McCafferty. I'm the president of the International Association of Germans from Lithuania, also known as the IAGL. We're a not-for-profit organization based here in the U.S. dedicated to providing resources and information to those interested in their German roots in southwest Lithuania, also known as the Deutsche aus Litauen, or Germans from Lithuania. Today we're talking about tips for finding your ancestors' village in southwest Lithuania. I would say besides helping somebody find a record at a church in southwest Lithuania, this is probably our second most common request for help or question that people have is, hey, I have the name of a village, but I can't find it on a map, either a new map or an old map. Can you please help me? It's a very common issue, and that's because it's kind of complicated because of the different geographic changes in southwest Lithuania over time. So I'm going to give you my top 5 tips. And, number one, these tips are meant to help those who already have the name of their ancestors' village. So if you don't even know where in Lithuania, you don't have the name of the village in Lithuania where your ancestor came from, this isn't really going to help you much. There's more work that you need to do up front before you get to this point. I think at some point I'd be happy to kind of record a separate webinar or video where I talk about how to do that or my tips for doing that. If you're interested, certainly leave a comment on this video or send us an email. It's info@germansfromlithuania.org. But today, this really is, I'm making the assumption that you've got the name of the village. You're just trying to find it on a map. And obviously, point number 2 is this is not an exhaustive list. These are my top 5 tips. These are usually the top 5 things I do to try to find a village if I don't already know where it is. And obviously, there are going to be more resources and tools that you can use. And please, if there's anything that you know of that you don't see in these tips, certainly leave a comment or send us an email. I'm always interested in knowing additional tools and resources that I can share with others. So the first thing we need to do is talk a little bit about the history and geography of the area. I know this is not meant to be a video on the history of southwest Lithuania, but if you don't know this information, it's important that you do in order to find the village that you're looking for, because it is going to play a big factor in you being able to understand why certain things are the way that they are. So this is a map of southwest Lithuania today. It's a map that we put together. We use it a lot in a lot of different presentations and publications because, number one, it establishes a sense of place. We're talking about what is today southwest Lithuania. You can see on the Lithuanian side, there's a bunch of different villages there, going all the way up north to Suwałki and going in Lithuania as far south as Serie and as far east as Godlau. And this is where the focus of the IAGL's records and resources are. Each one of these towns on the Lithuanian side are where a Lutheran church is or was located. And when you find an evangelical Lutheran church in southwest Lithuania, you're going to find Germans. So that's where most of our resources are located are from, because that's where those Lutheran churches were. You'll also notice some villages in northeast Poland as well, like Wyżajny, Suwałki, and Sedny, and even as far south as Augusto. And the reason for that is because that area is part of northeast Poland, and this part of southwest Lithuania at one time were all part of one Gubernia, which was a Suwałki Gubernia, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But that's why we also include records and resources from these places in northeast Poland, because this was all one area, and there are some folks, for example, that might be from Wysztytyn, which is right here, that moved to or were from Wyżajny. At one time, there was no border here, so it was very common that you'll find records for families in both of these churches because they're somewhat nearby. So we include that part of northeast Poland as well. You'll notice there are 2 villages on the Kaliningrad Oblast side that used to be part of East Prussia, Staljuponen and Pilyuponen. That's really just more to give you some context as to what villages were very nearby. But if you have ancestors that are from this border region, whether it's Neustadt or down here to Wysztytyn, a lot of those folks that lived on this side of Lithuania were originally from Staljuponen or Pilyuponen, or I should say those church communities. They're from nearby, but that's neither here nor there. It's just a tidbit of information. But point is, here's what Lithuania looks like today, and we're going to go back in time because that's well, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to find the villages of your ancestors. So if we go back to 1815, the map looks very different. We've zoomed out a bit. You have the massive empire that is Russia. And then you see this gray area called Congress Poland. Now, in the U.S., I usually hear it referred to as Russia Poland. In fact, that's how my grandmother always said it. She would say that they were from Russia Poland. And Congress Poland was, for all intents and purposes, part of Russia. I'm not going to go into the history of Congress Poland, but you'll notice what this arrow points to, this little nub on the northern part of Congress Poland, and that is the Suwałki Gubernia, or the Suwałki Governorate. If we go back to this modern map, this is this area right here, all the way going down to Augusto, northeast Poland, and southwest Lithuania. That is this little nub here, the Suwałki Gubernia. If we zoom into Congress Poland, or Russia Poland, okay, now we're looking at a map from 1907, you can see Congress Poland is split up between all these gubernia. Now, gubernia in English, I think, translates to governorate, but for those who are from the U.S., you might compare it to like a U.S. state. And you can see all these different states within Congress Poland. And there are a bunch of different ones. Ours is the Suwałki Gubernia, which is the one circled here in red, that little nub. So again, there it is, Congress Poland. So now from 1837 to 1867, the Suwałki Gubernia was known as the Augusto Gubernia. Again, I'm not going to go into why. It doesn't really matter at this point. But what essentially happened is that the capital of the Gubernia, the capital city, changed from Augusto to Suwałki in 1867, and so they renamed it the Suwałki Gubernia. The Powiats also changed a little bit over time, but the point is that's really the area that we're focused on. So let's zoom into the Suwałki Gubernia, and here we are. And you can see that it's split up even more. It's split up by these 7 sort of districts, and those are known as Powiats. Now, again, I mentioned just before, these changed, the number of them and what they were called somewhat changed over time. But the point is, this is really just to show you the hierarchy. Again, if we go back to a U.S. example, we have the state, you could call this like the state of Ohio. And then these little districts, these powiats, you might consider like a county. So my hometown of Cleveland is in the county of Cuyahoga, which is in the state of Ohio, which is in the United States. All of that information helps me to zoom into a more targeted area on a map. If I know that I'm looking at the United States, I'm looking at the state of Ohio, and I'm looking for the county of Cuyahoga, that helps me zoom in closer and closer to the area I'm trying to find. So here we've got the 7 powiats, and this is an example from 1907. And within those powiats, you also have additional sort of hierarchical areas. You've got a powiat, which is the district, these 7. You have an Urshant, which we would call like a district town. In the U.S., you might sort of consider it a county seat, although in the case of Congress Poland or the Russian Empire, there could be multiple Urshants within a district. So, but the point is, slightly larger town. And then from there, you have something called a gmina, which is a community or like a commune. And again, that's kind of the next largest town or location. You also have something called a parochia or parish, which is, the church community that a particular village or location belonged to. Now, the caveat here is, remember, Congress Poland was mostly Catholic in the past. So it still is today, really. And so if you see a village listed as belonging to a parish, chances are that parish is whatever the nearest Catholic parish is. So if you see that your ancestor is from a village and it's belonging to a parish that isn't where the Lutheran parish is, you might go, well, what's all that about? Well, that's because maybe the parish is located in a city where there isn't a Catholic parish, and therefore they're always going to list the Catholic parish first. So that's kind of an aside, but an important note. And then, of course, you go down to the actual village or city or folvark level, which is kind of like a manor farm. So this is the hierarchy. Again, all of this is to show you that, this hierarchical information can help you zoom into a much more targeted area on a map, because if all I have is the name of a village, and I'm going to open up a map here, this one's from 1859. If all I have is the name of a village and I just go straight to the map, and I don't have any of that context, I mean, look at the number of villages here. I mean, you could be looking at this map for days trying to locate a village. And this is just one map from 1859. But knowing that hierarchical information, knowing, if you can, the Powiat, the Ushant, the Gmina, or the Gmina, the Perifia, and I apologize, my Polish is not very good, as you can tell. But knowing that information is going to help you to really reduce the amount of area you have to search on a particular map. So that's why it's important to know this. And this information sometimes is located in the record itself. You'll see it. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it will be located, though, in a listing or in a gazetter, which is essentially like a directory of villages. And that information will be there, and that could be a huge help. And I'll show you an example of that in a little bit. So now that we have, a kind of context and a little bit of a history lesson, we can actually talk about these tips that I have. So first tip is kind of obvious, but it's important to repeat it because you really need to extract as many clues from the record that you're looking at as possible, whether it's a birth, marriage, death, or confirmation record. There are a number of clues that are going to be in almost all of those that are going to help you find a village. So first one is which church is the record being recorded in? Again, kind of obvious, but important to clarify that most, especially the Deutsche aus Litauen, the Germans from Lithuania, lived in rural areas. They tended not to live in cities. Not a rule, not just a general trend. And so they were going to attend churches that are going to be either within walking distance or horse ride distance from where they live to that church. So if a record is recorded in, the Church of Vistitten, you know that very likely your ancestors are living somewhere nearby. Now, there are exceptions. Marriage records are an example of an exception because usually the tradition was that you would go marry in the church that your bride was from. Not always, but often that was a tradition. But that wasn't a law. That was just a general tradition. So the other exception might be in the case of an emergency baptism where the pastor isn't at your home church and you have to travel. But those are the exceptions, not the rule. Generally speaking, you want to stick to where the general area around a particular parish. What are the residences of the witnesses? This is one a lot of people overlook. Your witnesses on birth, marriage, and death records were almost always individuals that knew personally the people within the record. Now, sometimes they may just be an acquaintance or somebody who has knowledge of that individual, but usually they're people who know, who the parents are, who the bride and groom are, who the person who died is. And in that case, they're going to have to be neighbors or people who live nearby. So if you see that a witness is from village A and your ancestor was born in village B, chances are village A and B are near each other. And the more villages you have to look at, the better your chances are of finding your target village. If you know that the witnesses are from these other villages, they are going to be nearby your target village, very likely. So make sure that you record the residences of the witnesses. Also, very often the witnesses can be family members as well. Family members tended to live near each other. Again, not a rule, but just a generality. Usually or I shouldn't say usually, but sometimes they can be. Very often they can be. And then what is the hierarchical geographic information that's provided? Yeah, I just talked about that in this, leading up to this, all of the kind of context of where people are from, and that helps to really be able to zoom in on a particular location. So tip number 2 would be the Geographical Dictionary of the Kingdom of Poland and Other Slavic Countries. This is probably my go-to sort of Bible when I can't figure out where a particular village is or if I've never heard of a village. This was published. It's a massive work. It's in several volumes. It was published between 1880 and 1902. And it covers just about all of the villages and cities and towns within the Kingdom of Poland, including Congress Poland, and even some surrounding areas. And the listings in here, it's alphabetical. The listings in here, well, depending on how significant or important the particular location was, could have things like demographic information, how many people are living there, who they are, if they're mostly Catholics or Lithuanians or Poles or Jews or Germans or whatever it is. There could be information about the history of the location, who is it named after, who owned it, there's going to be a lot of different clues within those listings, and it really depends on how big or small the village was. If the village is just a tiny little rural village, it may just have a couple of pieces of information. In other cases, it could have almost a novel of history and other important information. This particular work is available for free. You can find it online in a number of different places. jzi.org.pl has an index alphabetical directory that's specific to the Suwałki Gubernia, and I can show you that right now. That's this website here. And what's really cool about this is that, number one, it's indexed. So if you click on a particular letter, that's going to take you to villages that belong to that letter. Obviously, it's alphabetical, and it's indexed. So you can actually go through this and read it. You could do like a control find and search for a particular village. You could also search using the website search feature. But the point is, it's all indexed. So the other thing that's really special about this particular site is that these villages that they've listed here from A to Z are specific to the Suwałki area, the Suwałki Gubernia. The dictionary of the Geographical Dictionary of the Kingdom of Poland covers all of the Kingdom of Poland and some surrounding Slavic countries. So it's a massive work. Now you can view the original manuscript at this site, dir.icm.edu.pl, and you can actually see the original pages. It's set up in different volumes. It's not searchable. It's not indexed, although I think at this site it actually is a little bit searchable. But the point is, these are villages from all over Poland. The jzi.org.pl website, which I've linked in the video description, these villages are specific to the Suwałki Gubernia. So it's really great for us, those who are searching the Deutsche Ausleitown, because it's not going to be cluttered with villages that aren't within the area that we're looking. And for example, I'll show you. Here's where my ancestors were from, a village just north of Wysztytyn, and this is the listing for it in the Geographical Dictionary of the Kingdom of Poland, and it gives all the hierarchical information. It's a village, that's Weiss. It's in the Powiat of Wielkopolski. It belongs to the Gmina, or community, of Kopsudzi. In German, that village is Kaupischken. Belongs to the parish of Wysztytyn. Now, again, that parish is the Catholic parish. And it just so happens that the Lutheran and Catholic churches are both in the city of Wysztytyn. But let's say, for example, that the nearest Catholic parish was in Wielkopolski, the city of Wielkopolski. This would say Parafii Wielkopolski. It wouldn't say Wysztytyn. Point is, it's always going to be the nearest Catholic parish that it belongs to. And then it gives some additional information, where it is in reference to Wielkopolski, which is actually even a larger city than Wysztytyn. Talks about how many houses there are, how many people live there. That's information from when this was published, but it also has historical statistical information from 1827, how many houses and people lived in the village. So you can see that that's really great, because this information specifically, again, going back to the hierarchical information, this our village here, tells me, it helps me zoom in, and I'll actually show you how to do that in a little bit. So, knowing the powiats and the gminas and the parish helped me to much more quickly locate it on a map. So, definitely that's tip number 2. This dictionary is a huge asset if you're trying to find a particular village. Tip number 3, old maps key. I was just showing you a little bit ago, a map from 1859, and the reason why these old maps are key is because the official language in Lithuania, because it belonged to the Russian Empire up until Lithuanian independence, for our purposes, was Russian. And then before about 1867, 1868, it was Polish. And so the names of villages are going to be in their Polonized, Russianized versions when you see them in records. The current names of these villages on, whether you go to Google Maps or Maps.lt, are going to be in Lithuanian. And so if you only have the Polish or Russian version, you're not just going to be able to go to Google Maps and type it in and press search. It's not going to show up. Now, you might be able to go into Google and paste it in there, and if you're lucky, if the Polish or Russian or German name of the village has been posted on a website somewhere, you might get lucky and you'll find it. And there are many examples of that. But let's say it isn't. A lot of, especially smaller ones, aren't. You're not going to be able to find it on a newer map. And some of them are very, very different. Their Lithuanian names are very different than what their Polish, Russian, or German names were. For example, a good one is the current city of Kudirkos Naumistas. Now, my Lithuanian is really, really terrible, so I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but there it is right there. It's bordering what is today the Kaliningrad Oblast. It's right on the border, north of Istitten and Kibaten. Now, in German, that village, it's a city, was known as Neustadt Schwind. And in Polish and Russian, it was known as Władysław. So if you don't know that, then those names they seem to be completely different from each other. Now, in some cases, the Polish version of the Lithuanian village might be very similar. If you're somewhat knowledgeable of Polish and Lithuanian, you'll very often find villages where the Lithuanian version of the Polish name for the village is very obvious. It's just a Polonized version of a Lithuanian name or village. But again, in the case of Władysław or Neustadt or Kudirkos Naumistas, is very, very different from each other, and it's not going to be that obvious, even if you know the language. So the point is, you're going to need these older maps, and there are lots of resources online to find them. This one here, which is a map of the Wilkowicz Powiat, is from LithuanianMaps.com, which is a great site. I've got it right here. Right here. This site even breaks it down into the year range that you can find maps. So I think that one that I had was from, I'm not sure exactly the year 1907. But all sorts of other maps from 1914, 1915. I mean, they have even topographic maps, they have ethnographic maps. I mean, this is a great website. It's LithuanianMaps.com. There are other sites, I'll list them in the description, that I've used to find other maps. But the point is, your old maps are going to be really important. Don't just go straight to the new map, because chances are you're not going to find it. All right, tip number 4, some villages disappeared. This was somewhat common. If you have a really small rural village, especially if the only folks that were living there were Germans, after the war, unless local Lithuanians, inhabited that area, it may just disappear. It either gets absorbed into the nearby larger village, or maybe a local farmer buys it and starts farming it, and it just disappears. And I've seen this a lot after the war, where you'll see a village on a map, on an older map, and then you look on Google Maps or Maps.lt and it's just gone. Local villagers may remember the name of the village, and it may somewhat exist unofficially, but if nobody lives there and it's not inhabited, it just goes away. So again, that's why it's so important to use these older maps, because if you just go straight to Google Maps or Maps.lt, you might be looking for a village that isn't even there anymore. Last tip number 5, is Maps.lt, which I've referenced a couple times. This is really the Lithuanian version of Google Maps. I was using it just earlier. But this is what it looks like. The web address is Maps.lt. And, it's very similar to Google Maps in the sense that, you can zoom in, you have different kinds of maps that you can use, you can search in it as well. And, it really is great, primarily because if you go to Google Maps and you're trying to find a village and you can't find it on Google Maps, sometimes it is on Maps.lt, because this is a Lithuanian map made for Lithuania specifically. And so I have definitely found, especially again, smaller villages that, I go to Google Maps and it's not there, but I go to Maps.lt and it is. So use both Google Maps and Maps.lt, because it can really be important to, if you can't find that map on Google, or that village on Google Maps, you might find it on Maps.lt. So those are my top 5 tips. I think I mentioned just kind of showing a quick example of using the hierarchical information to find a village, and I can do that right now. So we'll use my family's village as an example, and the village is, in German, the village name is Lechunin. I'm not going to try to pronounce it in Polish or Lithuanian, because I don't want to butcher it. But here it is in the dictionary of the Kingdom of Poland, and it tells me again that it's and I kind of covered this earlier, but it tells me it's a village, so I know it's kind of smaller. I know it's in the Powiat Wielkopolskie, so that gives me a more general area. And then it belongs to this gmina, or the community of Kopsodzi. Now, and it belongs to the parish of Wysztytyn. Now, I know that there's a Lutheran parish in Wysztytyn, so that tells me that I need to be looking somewhere around, and the record was also, let's assume the record was recorded in Wysztytyn. I need to look somewhere around Wysztytyn, and there's Wysztytyn here on a map in 1859. Now, this isn't exactly a fair example because Gachunin is literally just north of the city on the map, so it would be pretty easy to find this, but let's just pretend that I didn't see that, or it wasn't there, or I don't know, let's say it was somewhere, in the distance, but it mentioned that it was in the gmina of Kopsodzi, and that is this village here, just up north. And so that is a clue. If this village wasn't so close already to Wysztytyn, let's say it was over here, being able to find this city Kopsodzi, or being able to find the gmina, would help me to just again zoom in much more closer to this particular area, and that really helps, especially if for example, if you look at a city like Mariampol, you can see all of these villages. I mean, there are a lot of them, and they're very close together. And so, for example, if you were trying to look for a village, let's say that was, this village here, let's say Suwałki, I'm assuming it probably belongs to the gmina of Suwałki, which is this one here, and that village name or that city name is a lot larger. So I might be drawn to that, and then I know, okay, if it belongs to this commune, this community, then I know I'm looking in this general area. So that's sort of how that works, and that's how I'm able to kind of find some of these on a map. And that all that information does come from this listing on the Geographical Dictionary. Now, sometimes this information, the Powiat, the commune, the parish, is included in the record itself. For example, if I look, if I go to a record, let's say, I was just looking at one today. I'm going to go to our index at the IAGL. I was looking at a Weimar record from 1900. It was a marriage record. Just going to press search. Yeah, that's the one I was looking at. So if I go to the original record, sometimes that information is contained within the margin. So in this record's in in Russian. And, I was looking for, if I'm looking for a particular village, it's telling me that this occurred, or that the villages that this is related to is Giastorczyki, which is in the gmina, not exactly sure how to pronounce it, but that's what the word is there, of Bartniki. So this village Giastorczyki belongs to the community of Bartniki, which is a larger town. If I go here to the map, I happen to already know where Bartniki is. It is down here near Kalvaria. Where are you? There it is. So it's a slightly larger town. And of course, if you look just up north, there is Giastorczyki. my terrible Polish. But there it is. It tells me right there. It belongs to this. So it's somewhere in this near the commune of Bartniki. Same thing. This is actually the location of the bride. She is from Dubiana, which is in the gmina of Karklini. Now, if I go to the map, Karklini, again, I happen to sort of already know where this is, but it's right there. And, Dubiani is nearby. So I'm not sure where it is exactly. I don't remember now that I'm looking at this, but, it's going to be somewhere in this general area. And actually, I'm not sure that it's on this particular map. Might be, but point is, that's how that works, and that information can be sometimes on the record, like it is right here in the margin of the marriage record, and then worst comes to worst, it's going to be here in the listing of the Geographic Dictionary of the Kingdom of Poland and other Slavic countries. So there's an example of kind of how that works, and those are my top 5 tips. Hopefully they help you. Obviously, again, if you've got other resources or tips or tools that you know of, certainly leave a comment in the description or under the description, or send us an email. It's info@germansfromlithuania.org. If you found this helpful, again, we are a not-for-profit organization, so nobody here takes a paycheck. It's all volunteer work. 100% of the donations help to either photograph more records or to help keep the website up and keep everything free. So please consider donating today.